A millionaire is about to sign the most important contract of his career when the 7-year-old daughter of his cleaning lady bursts through the door, desperately shouting, "Uncle, don't sign! Please, don't sign that paper!" His longtime partner, clearly annoyed by the interruption, violently grabs the girl's arm and snarls, "You cheeky child, get out now!" When the businessman witnesses this, something unbelievable awakens inside him. And what he did next shocked everyone. The Mont Blanc pen trembled slightly between Edward Miller's fingers as he surveyed the contract pages spread across the mahogany table. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the distinctive scent of leather from the executive chairs, creating that familiar atmosphere of power and pivotal decisions that usually brought him a sense of calm. But on that Thursday, something different hung in the air of the meeting room. "Edward, my friend, this is the moment we've been waiting for months," Robert Hayes, his partner of 23 years, said, adjusting his tie knot with a gesture Edward knew well. It was the same move Robert made when he closed big deals. "Apex Global has finally agreed to our terms. This contract will definitively pull us out of this crisis." Edward nodded, but an inexplicable uneasiness grew in his chest. Over the past 6 months, the company he had built with such effort had faced unprecedented financial difficulties. Cancelled contracts, key clients migrating to competitors, issues with suppliers. A sequence of events that seemed orchestrated by fate to test him. Robert had proven himself a true partner throughout the turmoil, working tirelessly to find solutions. "Are you sure you've analyzed all the clauses?" Edward asked, flipping through the dense pages of legal terms again. His background in business, administration equipped him to understand contracts, but this document seemed especially complex, full of technical terms and cross-references that made for difficult reading. Robert leaned closer, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder with the familiarity of decades of partnership. "Edward, trust me as you always have. Our lawyers reviewed every single comma. This is our salvation. Apex Global is offering a $50 million investment, exactly what we need to clear all debts and still have working capital to expand." The sincerity in Robert's gaze seemed genuine, but Edward felt a strange pressure, as if time was artificially running out. "Why such a rush, Robert? Can't they wait even one more day for me to review it calmly? You know how the international market is, Edward. They have other investment opportunities on the table. If we don't sign today, they might withdraw the proposal and look for other partners." Robert checked his wristwatch, a seemingly casual gesture that didn't escape Edward's attention. "Besides, our situation doesn't allow for further delays. The banks are pressing, and you know that better than anyone." Edward knew Robert was right about the creditors' pressure. In recent weeks, calls from bank managers had become more frequent and the tone more threatening. The company he had built from scratch, inspired by his late father's teachings on honesty and hard work, was on the verge of collapse. His wife, Maria, had passed away 2 years prior, a victim of a sudden illness that had profoundly shaken his certainties about life. "All right," Edward murmured, picking up the pen again. "But give me a few minutes for one last review of the main clauses." Robert smiled, but Edward noticed an almost imperceptible tension in his partner's facial muscles. "Of course, my friend. Take all the time you need. Just remember that our secretary has already confirmed the presence of Apex Global's representatives for 4 o'clock. They're coming specially from New York City for the signing." The weight of responsibility for the company's 120 employees pressed on Edward's shoulders. Each of them had families, dreams, bills to pay. How could he risk the future of so many people for a hesitation that might just be paranoia? Robert had always been loyal, always by his side during the toughest times. Edward leaned over the contract, preparing to sign the document that would change all their fates. when the meeting room door burst open with a crash that made both men jump from their seats. "Uncle Edward, don't sign. Please don't sign that. Paper!" The sharp, desperate voice cut through the room's silence like an emergency siren. A girl with curly brown hair and dark eyes gleaming with urgency ran to the table, her small hands reaching towards the contract as if she could physically prevent the signing. Edward immediately recognized Sophia, the 7-year-old daughter of Carmen, the cleaner who had worked in the building for 3 years. The child always greeted him with a radiant smile in the hallways, affectionately calling him uncle, despite there being no kinship between them. But he had never seen her with that expression of absolute panic now etched on her angelic face. "What is the meaning of this?" Robert rose abruptly, his face flushing with anger. The transformation was so sudden that Edward was startled by the intensity of his partner's fury. "How did this child get in here? Where is the building security?" Sophia recoiled a few steps, but kept her eyes fixed on Edward, completely ignoring Robert's threatening presence. "Uncle Edward, I heard him talking on the phone. He said bad things about you. Don't sign, please. You snot-nosed brat." Robert advanced towards Sophia with an aggression Edward had never witnessed in so many years of partnership. "Get out of here now. You have no right to interrupt important meetings." Before Edward could react, Robert violently grabbed the girl's arm, making her let out a cry of pain and surprise. Little Sophia tried to break free, but the adult man's strength was disproportionate for her age. "Robert!" Edward sprang from his chair, a primitive, protective fury exploding in his chest. "Let her go immediately. Have you lost your mind? This kid is messing up the most important deal of our lives," Robert growled, tightening his grip on Sophia's arm. "Her parents need to teach this inconvenient child some manners." Edward had never seen this brutal side of Robert. For more than 2 decades of partnership, he had always known a polite, controlled, diplomatic man in all situations. The violence with which he treated a defenseless child revealed a dark side that had remained hidden for all those years. "I said let her go!" Edward firmly held Robert's wrist, forcing him to release Sophia. "Never touch her again!" Robert recoiled, breathing heavily as if waking from a trance of rage. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain his corporate composure. "My apologies, Edward. The pressure of this deal is getting to me. But you need to understand that we cannot allow a child—" "A child what?" Edward interrupted, kneeling beside Sophia to check if she was hurt. The girl was trembling, but her eyes still shone with determination. "Sophia, are you hurt? Did he harm you?" The little girl shook her head negatively, but whispered something that made Edward's blood run cold. "Uncle, he doesn't know I was in the ventilation duct when he talked on the phone. He said, once he signs, we'll have full control. He'll never know he lost everything until it's too late." Robert instantly paled. "This is ridiculous, a child making up stories for attention. Edward, you can't take the fantasies of a 7-year-old seriously." But Edward carefully observed Sophia's expression. There was something in the seriousness of her gaze, in the precision of her words, that didn't match a childish invention. The child knew details about the building's structure that suggested she had indeed been hidden in places where she could overhear private conversations. "Sophia, are you sure about what you heard?" Edward asked softly, keeping his hands protectively on the girl's shoulders. "Yes, Uncle. He also talked about you getting sick and not being able to take care of the company anymore. He said it would be easier that way." Sophia looked directly at Robert, who quickly averted his gaze. "That's why I ran to warn you. Mom always says we should help good people." The silence that followed was thick as lead. Edward felt the world spinning around him as he processed the implications of Sophia's words. 23 years of absolute trust in Robert began to crumble like a house of cards under a devastating wind. Edward remained kneeling beside Sophia, his mind frantically working to process the situation. The child's words echoed in his ears like alarm bells, but business logic struggled against the growing distrust. Robert had been his partner for over 2 decades. They had built an empire together that employed dozens of families. How could he believe a child's words against so many years of shared loyalty? "Edward, please, be rational," Robert said, gradually regaining his executive composure. "You've known Sophia since she was little. We know how children her age confuse reality with imagination. She probably heard fragments of some business conversation and made up the rest." Sophia crossed her thin arms over her chest, adopting a defiant posture that surprised Edward with its maturity. "I didn't make anything up. You said Uncle Edward was going to disappear off the map after signing the paper, and you laughed when you said it." "Enough!" Robert slammed his fist on the table, making objects jump. "I will not allow my 23 years of dedication to this company to be questioned because of the delusions of an ill-mannered child." Robert's explosive reaction only confirmed Edward's growing suspicions. The man he knew rarely lost control and had never shown such hostility towards children. The personality transformation was so drastic that it felt like he was facing a stranger. "Robert, calm down," Edward said, slowly standing up. "If there's nothing to hide, why are you so agitated? Sophia is just a worried child." "Worried?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Or manipulated by someone who wants to sabotage our deal? Have you thought about that, Edward? What if competitors are using this child to hurt us?" Edward looked at Sophia, who remained serene despite the palpable tension in the room. There was something in the girl's calmness that contrasted with Robert's increasing nervousness. A 7-year-old would not be able to maintain an elaborate lie under pressure, especially in front of an intimidating adult. "Uncle Edward," Sophia whispered, approaching him, "I can show you where I was hiding. In the ventilation duct, you can hear everything that happens in here. Mom doesn't know I play there, but I heard everything." "This is absurd," Robert quickly intervened. "Edward, you can't be considering giving credibility to this charade. We have a deadline to meet, investors waiting, employees depending on this signing." But Edward had already made a decision. Even if Sophia was mistaken, he needed absolute certainty before signing any document. "Robert, I'm postponing the signing for a few hours. I need to analyze the contract more carefully." "A few hours?" Robert's voice went up an octave. "Edward, this is unacceptable. Apex Global's representatives are already on their way. How am I going to explain that we cancelled a meeting because of a child's fantasies?" "Explain that a technical issue arose that needs clarification," Edward replied firmly. "A good deal can wait a few hours to be properly closed." Robert ran a hand over his face, visibly frustrated. "Edward, you're making a mistake that could cost us the company. This might be our last chance for salvation." "If it's truly our salvation, it will still be there in a few hours," Edward countered. "Sophia, does your mother know you're here?" The girl shook her head negatively. "She's cleaning the 10th floor. I snuck down because I needed to tell you." Edward felt his heart warm at the child's genuine concern. Sophia had risked a scolding from her mother and confronted an intimidating adult just to try to protect him from a danger she believed to be real. "Very well, young hero," Edward said, offering the first sincere smile of the afternoon. "I'll take you back to your mother, and then Robert and I will have a very serious conversation about this contract." "Edward, this is a terrible mistake," Robert murmured, but something in his voice had changed. The desperate insistence had been replaced by a calculating coldness that Edward had never noticed before. "You'll regret having doubted me." Edward accompanied Sophia to the 10th floor, where he found Carmen organizing cleaning supplies with the efficiency he had always admired in the woman. At 42, Carmen worked with a dedication that reminded Edward of his own parents. Simple, people who found dignity in honest work. Sophia, what are you doing here? Carmen dropped the cleaning cloths and ran to her daughter, concern etched on her face. You should be at school. Mum, I needed to help Uncle Edward, Sophia explained with the seriousness of an adult. He was in danger. Edward observed the interaction between mother and daughter, noticing how Carmen didn't scold Sophia immediately, but knelt to listen to what the child had to say. It was a display of respect for her daughter's intelligence that deeply touched the businessman's heart. Miss Santiago, may I have a word with you? Edward asked gently. It's about what Sophia said in the meeting room. Carmen nodded, directing Sophia to a nearby chair where the girl could play with some crayons she always carried in her backpack. Mr. Miller, I apologize if my daughter bothered you. She's sometimes very protective. On the contrary, Edward smiled. She might have saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Sophia said she heard Mr. Hayes talking on the phone about the contract I was about to sign. Do you know anything about that? Carmen hesitated, her hands nervously smoothing her uniform. Mr. Miller, I don't want to cause trouble. I need this job to support Sophia. Ms. Santiago, you would never cause me trouble. We're a family here in this company, and families protect each other. Edward spoke sincerely. If there's something I should know, I need you to trust me. Carmen looked at Sophia, who was coloring. A drawing of a girl protecting a man in a suit from something dark and menacing. The simplicity of the child's art perfectly captured the essence of the situation. Sophia has a habit of exploring the building while I work, Carmen admitted. I know I should watch her more, but she's very curious and smart. Sometimes she tells me things she overhears in the hallways. And what did she tell you recently? Last week she said she heard Mr. Hayes talking about getting rid of the Edward problem in a phone conversation. I thought it was her imagination, but Sophia rarely makes up stories. Carmen lowered her voice. Yesterday, she told me he said you wouldn't be in charge much longer. Edward felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing pattern that he could no longer ignore. Why didn't you tell me this before? Mr. Miller, Mr. Hayes has been your partner for so many years. Who am I to question the boss's business? I'm just the cleaner, Carmen sighed. But when Sophia saw you about to sign those papers today, she said she couldn't let the good uncle be hurt by the bad man. Edward knelt beside Sophia, who continued coloring with absolute concentration. Sophia, can you show me where you heard these conversations? The girl looked up with bright eyes. Yes, uncle, but it has to be a secret. The bad man can't know I know about the secret place. 20 minutes later, Edward followed Sophia through maintenance corridors he didn't even know existed in his own company. The child moved with the confidence of someone who knew every corner of the building, leading him to an opening in the ventilation system that offered access to several floors. Look, uncle, Sophia whispered, pointing to a ventilation grate that offered a direct view into the meeting room. From here, you can hear everything. I was playing spy when he said those bad things. Edward looked through the grate and had a perfect view of his own desk. Any conversation in the room would be perfectly audible from that position. Sophia wasn't inventing. She had truly witnessed compromising conversations. When they returned to the meeting room, Edward found Robert putting away the contract documents with hurried movements. Ah, Edward, I was looking for you. I managed to postpone the meeting with the investors until tomorrow morning. That gives us time to clear up any misunderstandings. That's good, Edward replied, carefully observing his partner's every gesture. That will allow me to examine every clause of the contract with the attention it deserves. Robert hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. Of course, my friend, I'm sure that when you analyze it calmly, you'll see it's truly our salvation. But when Edward sat down alone to study the contract after Robert left, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Hidden among technical clauses on page 17, there was a condition that would transfer 90% of his shares to Robert in case of temporary or permanent incapacitation to perform executive duties. Edward arrived at the office the coup next morning with a sense of urgency he couldn't disguise. He had spent the night analyzing every line of the contract, discovering other suspicious clauses cleverly disguised among complex legal terms. With each page he turned, Robert's betrayal became more evident and more cruel. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Create an artificial financial crisis, offer a seemingly salvific solution that would, in fact, transfer total control of the company. The conditions for incapacitation were so vague that practically any stressful situation or conflict could be interpreted as justification to remove him from the presidency. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," greeted Brenda, his secretary of 15 years. But there was something strange in her voice, a formality that didn't match their usual familiarity. "Good morning, Brenda. Something wrong?" She hesitated, looking nervously around before approaching. "So something very strange happened last night. Ms. Santiago was fired." Edward felt as if he had been punched in the gut. "Fired? By whom? For what reason?" Mr. Hayes talked to the cleaning staff. He said there were complaints about her work. Negligence, that they found poorly cleaned areas and missing supplies. Brenda lowered her voice even further. "But sir, I know Carmen's work. She's the most dedicated employee we've ever had here." The confirmation of his suspicions came as a wave of nausea. Robert was retaliating against Carmen and Sophia for the previous day's interference. The cruelty of punishing a single mother, who depended on her job to support her daughter, revealed a sadistic side Edward had never imagined existed in his partner. "Where's Robert?" Edward asked, fighting to control his rising anger. "He came in early today. He's in his office preparing for the meeting with the Apex Global investors." Edward immediately headed to Robert's office, finding him on the phone, laughing at something the caller was saying. When he saw Edward at the door, Robert quickly ended the call. "Edward, good you're early. Apex Global representatives will be here at 10. I hope you've cleared all your doubts about the contract." "I've cleared up many things," Edward replied coldly, "especially why you fired Carmen." Robert assumed an expression of false surprise. "Ah, that. A difficult but necessary decision. We received several complaints about her work. As responsible businessmen, we cannot ignore issues of service quality." "What complaints, Robert? From whom?" "Several employees mentioned poorly cleaned areas, dirty supplies." Robert spoke with the ease of someone who had rehearsed the lies. "You know how important it is to maintain company standards, especially when we're receiving international investors." Edward approached Robert's desk, resting his hands on the glass surface. "Carmen has worked here for 3 years. There has never been a single complaint about her work. In fact, she's always been praised for her dedication." "Edward, you're letting personal matters influence your professional judgment." Robert leaned back in his chair, adopting a defensive posture. "Carmen's dismissal has nothing to do with her daughter's inappropriate interference yesterday." "It doesn't?" Edward laughed bitterly. "What an interesting coincidence, don't you think? The same day Sophia tries to warn me about something suspicious in the contract, her mother loses her job for alleged negligences no one ever reported." Robert stood up, walking to the window with his hands clasped behind his back. "Edward, you're letting yourself be influenced by a child's fantasies. This is dangerous for our partnership and for the company's future." "Dangerous?" Edward repeated the word, savoring its bitterness. "You know what I find truly dangerous, Robert? Discovering that my partner of 23 years included clauses in the contract that would give you total control of the company if I were deemed incapacitated to perform my duties. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert remained with his back to Edward, but his posture stiffened noticeably. "You read the contract more carefully," Robert finally murmured. "I read every word, every comma, every clause." Edward felt a deadly chill take over his voice. "And now I perfectly understand why you were in such a hurry for me to sign yesterday." When Robert turned around, Edward saw for the first time the true man behind the mask of loyalty he had worn for decades. The friendly smile was replaced by a calculating, cold gaze that made Edward wonder how many other times he had been deceived without realizing it. "So, what do you intend to do now, Edward?" Edward stared at Robert for long seconds before answering. The question hung in the air like a veiled threat, laden with implications he was only beginning to comprehend. "What do I intend to do? First, I'm rehiring Carmen immediately. Second, I'm definitively cancelling this fraudulent contract." Robert let out a dry laugh, devoid of any humor. "Fraudulent, Edward, you're being dramatic. Those are standard corporate protection clauses. Any competent lawyer would include similar terms." "Standard clauses?" Edward moved closer. "Robert, these conditions would allow you to declare me incapable of performing executive duties if I had a simple difference of opinion with you. Emotional instability detrimental to the company's interests. Those were your exact words in Clause 17. Robert's mask of cordiality finally crumbled completely. The man Edward had known as a loyal partner transformed before his eyes, revealing a calculating coldness that made the businessman question how many other situations had been manipulated over the years. "You've always been too naive for business, Edward," Robert said, turning to his desk and mechanically arranging some documents. "Your father left you a prosperous company, but you never had the toughness needed to keep it at the top. Always trusting everyone, always believing the best in people. Trusting you, for example." "Exactly," Robert smiled cruelly. "All these years, while you played nice guy businessman, I built a network of real contacts, closed deals that truly mattered, protected this company from your own naivete." Edward felt as if he was meeting Robert for the first time. Every word revealed layers of resentment and manipulation that had remained hidden for decades. "And the financial crisis of the last few months? Was that your doing too? You really want to know the truth?" Robert opened a drawer in his desk, pulling out a folder full of documents. "Here are all the contracts you lost over the last 6 months, all cancelled after strategic conversations I had with clients, warning them about your supposed emotional instability after your wife's death." The revelation hit Edward like a lightning bolt. Maria's loss had been the most painful moment of his life, and discovering that Robert had used his grief as a weapon of manipulation ignited a fury he had never experienced. "You used Maria's death against me? I used reality to my advantage," Robert replied, without showing any remorse. "You really became unstable after her death. You started making decisions based on emotion instead of business logic. It was only a matter of time until that hurt the company." Edward leaned on the desk, feeling his legs waver under the weight of the revelations. "So you orchestrated this whole crisis to force me to accept a contract that would take me out of the presidency of my own company. I saved the company from you, Edward, and I would save you from yourself if you were smart enough to sign those papers." Robert put away the folder, closing the drawer with a dry click. "But now that you've discovered my plan, things have gotten more complicated." "More complicated how?" Robert walked to the window again, watching the street below. "Edward, do you really believe I built this operation alone? Do you believe I have only one alternative plan for every situation?" A chill ran down Edward's spine. "What are you talking about?" I'm talking about a network of people who invested time and resources in this project. People who won't be happy if they find out you discovered our plans thanks to a child's delusions. Robert turned slowly, and Edward saw something. In his eyes he had never noticed before. A murderous coldness that made every cell in his body scream danger. People who might not understand why a woman who should be cleaning bathrooms and her inconvenient daughter keep interfering in business that doesn't concern them. The threat was crystal clear. Edward understood that Carmen and Sophia were not just unemployed, they were in real danger. The dismissal had been just the first move of a retaliation that could escalate to something much worse. "If you lay a finger on them," Edward began, but Robert cut him off with a hand gesture. Edward, it doesn't have to be this way. We can still resolve everything civilly." Robert returned to his chair, resuming the business posture Edward knew so well. "Sign the contract, accept a period of medical leave, and I guarantee Carmen and her daughter will have a quick and painless death wherever they choose to live." "A death? Edward, did you really believe I would allow eyewitnesses to our operations to continue living? They know too much, just like your late wife knew too much." Robert paused theatrically. "The difference is this time you can choose to die with them, instead of living with the guilt." The call ended, leaving Edward face to face with the most terrible choice of his life: surrender to certain death or attempt a desperate rescue that could result in the death of the two people who mattered most to him. Edward remained holding the phone for long minutes after Robert's call, his mind frantically working to find a solution that would save Carmen and Sophia without resulting in his own death. The coldness with which Robert had spoken about murdering a child revealed a level of evil beyond anything Edward had imagined possible. "Dr. Morgan, I need your help with something that could cost us all our lives," Edward said, carefully putting away the evidence Sophia had hidden. "But I cannot let a child die for trying to protect me." The lawyer studied Edward's face, seeing a determination that transcended fear. "What do you have in mind?" "Robert wants me to show up at the clinic by midnight. That gives us 6 hours. To organize a plan." Edward walked to the window, watching the sun begin to set. "But first, I need to know exactly where they're holding Carmen and Sophia." Dr. Morgan picked up his laptop and began searching for information about Serenity Pines. "Clinic. Edward, look at this. The clinic has a compulsory hospitalization wing that's practically isolated from the rest of the facilities. If that's where they keep their victims, it will be very difficult to reach them." Edward studied the online images of the clinic, memorizing every architectural detail. "Dr. Morgan, you said Mark discovered evidence that other businessmen were killed by this organization. Did he mention specific names?" "Yes. He cited at least 3 cases in the last 2 years, all successful businessmen who suddenly developed mental problems and were admitted to the same clinic." An idea began to form in Edward's mind. "Dr. Morgan, if we can prove there's a systematic pattern of murders at the clinic, and if we have evidence of Robert's operations, we can expose the entire organization. But that requires time we don't have. Robert expects you there in a few hours." Edward smiled for the first time in days, but it was a joyless smile. "Then we'll give him exactly what he wants. My presence at the clinic, but not in the way he expects." Over the next hour, Edward outlined a plan that Dr. Morgan considered both brilliant and suicidal. First, they would contact honest authorities. Edward knew not all police officers were involved in the conspiracy. Second, they would use Sophia's evidence to convince at least one district attorney to investigate the clinic. The problem is, we need someone within the judicial system who hasn't been bought off by Robert, Dr. Morgan observed. "I know someone," Edward said, picking up his phone. "Attorney Maria Sanchez, district attorney. She's investigated corporate corruption cases before and has a reputation for being incorruptible. The call to Attorney Sanchez was transformative. When Edward explained the situation and presented Sophia's photographic evidence, the prosecutor immediately understood the gravity of the case. "Mr. Miller, we were already investigating suspicious deaths related to Serenity Pines Clinic. Your evidence could be the key to dismantling the entire operation," the prosecutor said. "But if you go to the clinic alone, you'll be signing your death warrant. Attorney Sanchez, they have a 7-year-old child and her mother as hostages. I can't abandon them, and you don't have to. I have an idea that can save all of you and still expose the criminals." Attorney Sanchez's plan involved Edward presenting himself at the clinic as Robert demanded, but wearing a recording device connected directly to the district attorney's office. Simultaneously, a team of honest police officers would surround the location to prevent escapes. "The risk is enormous," the prosecutor warned. "If they discover the device, they'll kill you immediately. And if I don't try, they'll kill Carmen. And Sophia anyway," Edward countered. "Attorney Sanchez, I need you to know something important. I believe my wife was murdered at that same clinic 2 years ago. If we can prove that, we'll be able to prosecute everyone involved for murder, in addition to the other charges." The prosecutor's voice hardened. "Mr. Miller, I will personally ensure these criminals pay for every life they've destroyed." At 10 o'clock that night, Edward drove alone towards Serenity Pines Clinic, equipped with practically invisible recording devices provided by the district attorney's office. Dr. Morgan had stayed behind, responsible for coordinating with authorities, ensuring the rescue operation would be executed at the exact moment. During the drive, Edward thought of Maria Miller and how proud she would have been of his decision to protect Carmen and Sophia, even risking everything. He also thought of the extraordinary courage of a 7-year-old girl who had faced dangerous, meant to save someone she considered family. When he spotted the gates of Serenity Pines Clinic, Edward felt a mixture of terror and determination. He knew that in the next few hours he would finally discover the truth about Maria's death and confront the murderers who had destroyed so many families. He parked the car and walked towards the main entrance, where Robert was already waiting, with a smile that promised only suffering and death. "Edward, so punctual. Carmen and Sophia are eager to see you." Edward followed Robert through the sterile corridors of Serenity Pines Clinic, each step echoing like a countdown to the confrontation that would define the fate of all involved. The smell of disinfectant and medicine brought back painful memories of Maria's last days, but now it also carried the promise of long-delayed justice. "You made the right choice, Edward," Robert said, guiding him through an isolated wing of the building. "To die with dignity alongside the people you want to protect is far nobler than living knowing your cowardice caused their deaths." "Where are they?" Edward kept his voice steady, despite the terror growing in his chest with each door they passed. Robert stopped in front of a room at the end of the corridor, producing a key from his pocket. "Right behind this door. But first, I need you to understand exactly what's going to happen here." When the door opened, Edward saw Carmen and Sophia sitting in chairs in the center of a room that looked more like an interrogation room than a hospital ward. Both were visibly shaken, but unharmed. Sophia looked up when she saw him enter, and her little face lit up with a brave smile that broke Edward's heart. "Uncle Edward, I knew you'd come for us." "Of course I did, my little hero," Edward replied, trying to approach her but being blocked by one of Robert's henchmen. "Are you two okay? Did they hurt you?" "We're fine, Mr. Miller," Carmen said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sophia was very brave. She kept saying you would come and save us." Robert laughed cruelly. "What a touching family reunion. Edward, I hope you appreciate these final moments because that's exactly what they are. Final." Dr. Caldwell, the clinic doctor, whom Edward recognized from Sophia's photographs, entered the room carrying a tray with syringes. "Mr. Hayes," The preparations are ready. Which of the three would you prefer to start with? Edward felt his blood run cold. Robert, for God's sake, they're innocent people. Sophia is just a child. A child who meddled in adult affairs, Robert countered. Edward, did you really believe we built this operation only for it to be dismantled by a 7-year-old girl? She and her mother are witnesses who can destroy us. Sophia surprised everyone by speaking with a serenity that defied her age. Uncle Robert, why do you want to hurt Uncle Edward? He's always been good to everyone. Robert knelt in front of the girl, adopting a falsely affectionate expression that made Edward want to vomit. Sophia, dear, sometimes adults have to do things children don't understand. Your Uncle Edward isn't the good person you think he is. You're lying, Sophia said with absolute conviction. Uncle Edward protected me when you were being mean to me. Good people protect children, bad people hurt them. The brutal simplicity of the child's logic momentarily disarmed even Robert. Dr. Caldwell, impatient, interrupted the moment. Mr. Hayes, I need to administer the doses before anyone notices our absence. Let's start with Mr. Miller. Edward realized it was the crucial moment of his plan. Robert, before I die, I need to know one thing. Maria discovered your operations, didn't she? Robert smiled with sadistic pride. Maria was too smart for her own good. She started asking inconvenient questions about the financial transfers, investigating transactions she couldn't comprehend. And you brought her here. I did. Dr. Caldwell is very skilled at making deaths look natural. A sudden illness, gradual deterioration, inevitable demise, Robert gestured theatrically. Your wife suffered a slow, painful agony, Edward. She died knowing she had discovered the truth, but unable to do anything to stop it. The full confession was perfectly captured by the recording devices Edward carried. Dr. Caldwell prepared the first syringe, approaching Edward with calculated movements. This first dose will only immobilize you, the doctor explained. The next ones will simulate a complete nervous breakdown. In 2 hours, you'll be dead, but the records will show a death by natural causes related to extreme stress. The moment the needle touched Edward's arm, the clinic lights suddenly went out. Police sirens echoed from outside the building, and the sound of doors being forced open reached the room where they were. "What's happening?" Robert shouted, running to the window. Edward smiled for the first time in days. "Robert, you made a fatal mistake. You confessed everything in front of the wrong person." "District Attorney Maria Sanchez," an authoritative voice shouted from the hallway. "We have an arrest warrant for Robert Hayes, Dr. Caldwell, and everyone involved in this criminal operation." Robert looked at Edward with pure hatred, finally understanding that he had been tricked. "You were recording our conversation." "Every word," Edward confirmed as police officers stormed the room. "And now the whole world will know you murdered Maria and destroyed dozens of families." When Robert was handcuffed, Sophia ran to Edward, hugging him tightly. "Uncle, I knew you'd catch the bad man." 3 weeks after the operation at Serenity Pines Clinic, Edward found himself in court watching Robert being sentenced for an impressive list of crimes: murder, corporate fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy, and corruption. The man he had once considered a brother was unrecognizable, his face aged by stress and his eyes empty, finally understanding the consequences of his actions. Robert Hayes, for the proven crimes against Mr. Edward Miller, Maria Miller, and at least 6 other businessmen, this court sentences you to 45 years in prison without possibility of parole, the judge declared sternly. Edward felt no satisfaction with the sentence, only a deep relief that justice had finally prevailed. Beside him, Dr. Morgan organized documents that would prove Edward's innocence in all the false accusations Robert had fabricated. "Edward, All the contracts Robert fraudulently cancelled are being reactivated, the lawyer informed him. Your clients received the evidence of the manipulation and want to resume business immediately. But Edward was more interested in other news. Dr. Morgan, what about the other families that Robert destroyed? Can we help them? Attorney Sanchez managed to identify at least 12 families who were victims of the organization over the past 10 years. With the assets that will be confiscated from Robert and his associates, we will establish a compensation fund. Edward nodded, satisfied. Justice could not bring the dead back to life, but at least the surviving families would receive some support to rebuild their lives. As they left the courthouse, Edward found Carmen and Sophia waiting on the steps. The two had become an integral part of his life during the weeks of investigation, and he could no longer imagine a future without them. "Uncle Edward!" Sophia ran to hug him, holding a drawing she had made. "I drew our family!" Edward looked at the simple but moving drawing, 3 figures holding hands in front of a big house with a bright sun in the sky. "Sophia, it's beautiful. But why did you draw 3 people? Because now we're a family, right?" Sophia looked at him with the seriousness only children can assume. "You, me, and Mom. The bad man can't separate us anymore." Carmen approached, holding an envelope. "Mr. Miller, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for us, but now that the situation is resolved, Sophia and I can go back to our normal lives." Edward felt his heart sink. Over the past few weeks, he had come to understand that Carmen and Sophia had filled a void in his life that he didn't even know existed. The big, empty house where he had lived alone since Maria's death had transformed into a home, filled with laughter and conversations when the two were present. "Ms. Santiago, may I make a proposal to you both?" Carmen hesitated, clearly worried that Edward felt obligated to help them out of gratitude. "Mr. Miller, we don't want to be a burden to you." "A burden?" Edward laughed genuinely for the first time in months. "Ms. Santiago, you two saved my life, my company, and my sanity. If anyone owes gratitude here, it's me." Edward knelt beside Sophia, taking her small hands in his. "Sophia, would you like to have a big house with a garden where you can play, and a room all your own with all the books and toys you want?" Sophia's eyes sparkled. "And Mom would have a nice room too?" "Of course. And your mother would never have to worry about working for other people again, because she would be the most important person in our house." Carmen began to cry silently. "Mr. Miller, I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Ms. Santiago. It's family." Edward stood up, taking the envelope from her hands and putting it away without opening it. "Throughout all these weeks, you've shown me what it means to have people who truly care about me. Sophia taught me courage, and you taught me that dignity isn't about money, but about character." "So we're going to live with you forever?" Sophia asked, holding Edward's hand. "If you want to, yes. But first I need to ask your mother a very important question." Edward turned to Carmen, pulling a set of papers from his pocket that he had prepared days earlier. "Ms. Santiago, would you do me the honor of officially adopting Sophia? I want her to be my legal daughter, with all the rights and protections that implies." Carmen covered her face with her hands, sobbing with emotion. "Mr. Miller, Sophia has always wanted a father, and after everything you've done for us—" "Mum, does this mean Uncle Edward is going to be my real daddy?" Sophia asked, practically vibrating with excitement. Edward picked Sophia up, feeling his heart expand with a love he hadn't experienced since Maria's death. "Sophia, if your mother agrees, you'll be my daughter forever, and I'll be the proudest father in the world." "I agree," Carmen whispered, hugging both of them. "Edward, may I call you Edward now? You are the most honorable man I have ever met. Sophia couldn't have a better father." As the three embraced on the courthouse steps, Edward thought about how life had a mysterious way of balancing losses and gains. He had lost Maria and discovered Robert's betrayal, but he had gained a new family based on true love and loyalty, tested in the most difficult circumstances. The meeting room, where he had almost lost everything, would now host celebrations for a family created through mutual courage and reciprocal protection. 6 months later, Edward found himself in the same meeting room where everything had begun. But the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Instead of the tense smell of coffee and leather mixed with anxiety, the air was filled with the aroma of chocolate cake that Sophia had insisted on making to celebrate the finalization of the adoption papers. "Daddy Edward, you have to sign here," Sophia said, pointing to the dotted line on the official document that would legally make her his daughter. She had started calling him Daddy naturally, and every time he heard the word, Edward felt his heart warm with a happiness he had thought impossible after Maria's death. Carmen watched the scene with tears of joy in her eyes, wearing the new dress Edward had insisted she buy for the occasion. She now worked as the household manager of Edward's large home, but her real role was that of a mother in a family that had become unexpectedly and perfectly complete. "Edward, are you sure you won't regret having 2 women running your life?" Carmen joked, organizing the documents with the care Edward had learned to admire in her. Carmen, Edward corrected himself, smiling. "I've discovered that being run by people who truly love us is the greatest privilege a man can have." Dr. Morgan, who had become a close family friend, poured champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Sophia. "Edward, I've never seen you as happy as you've been in recent months. It's like you've been reborn." "I have been reborn, Dr. Morgan. Sophia taught me that courage isn't about age or size, but about doing the right thing even when we're scared." Edward picked up his daughter, kissing her forehead. "And Carmen showed me that true family is who chooses to stand by us when everything seems lost." Sophia hugged Edward's neck, whispering in his ear, "Daddy, do you think Mommy Maria would be happy with our new family?" The question touched Edward deeply. In recent months, he had managed to make peace with Maria's memory, understanding that she would have been proud to see how he had protected innocent people and built a new family based on love. "I'm sure she would be very happy, Sophia. She always said that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies." Edward's company prospered again, but he had implemented important changes in its management. Now there were strict protocols for financial transparency, an independent board of directors, and an assistance fund for employees facing personal difficulties. "Sophia, do you remember the first time you came running into this room?" Edward asked, walking to the table where it had all begun. "I do. I was very scared, but I knew I had to save you from the bad man." Sophia touched the table's surface with reverence. "Daddy, why do adults sometimes do bad things?" "Sometimes people get lost, little hero. They forget what's really important in life and start thinking that money and power are more important than love and family." Carmen approached, hugging both of them. "Sophia, your father is right, but there are also good people like him who always do what's right even when it's hard." Edward looked around the room, remembering the tension of that terrible day when he had almost signed his own ruin. Now, the same table held adoption papers, honest partnership contracts, and plans to expand the assistance fund to other families victimized by corporate crimes. "Dr. Morgan, how are the other families we managed to help?" "All recovering well. Edward, the fund we established has already benefited 15 families, and 3 businessmen have managed to rebuild their businesses completely." Sophia jumped from Edward's arms and ran to a wall where she had hung her family drawing. "Daddy, look! I need to draw one more person here." "One more person? Who?" "Dr. Morgan. He's part of our family now too." Dr. Morgan laughed, clearly moved. "Sophia, it would be an honor to be part of this extraordinary family." Edward watched his new family gathered in the room where he had almost lost everything. understanding that sometimes the darkest moments of our lives are merely preludes to the greatest happiness we can experience. "You know what impresses me most about this whole story?" Edward said, hugging Carmen and holding Sophia's hand. "It's that the smallest person in the room was the only one brave enough to face the danger and save us all. It wasn't just me, Daddy. Mom was brave too, and you were the bravest of all when you came to save us." Edward knelt again beside Sophia, taking her small hands in his, the same gesture he had made on the day she saved him. "Sophia, I promise I will always protect our family, just as you protected me. And I promise I will never again sign any important paper without consulting my smartest advisor. I promise too, Daddy, I'll always take care of you and Mom." As the sun set on that celebratory afternoon, Edward understood that he had learned the most important lesson of his life. The most valuable contracts aren't signed with pens, but sealed with hugs, tears of joy, and promises of eternal love. The meeting room, where a brave child had screamed to prevent a signing, now held the most important signature of Edward's life, the papers that officially made Sophia his daughter and completed a family created through courage, loyalty, and true love.